we do have breaking details coming into the newsroom in the trial of Carmelo Anthony. Putting this on your screen, Brooke Taylor, Fox News correspondent, saying the judge in the Carmelo Anthony trial just released evidence, including body camera footage showing the moments an officer took him into custody after the stabbing. Anthony is heard saying, quote, "He put his hands on me. I told him not to. He put his hands on me." We do have more details in this, including pictures of the murder weapon, the aftermath, and Anthony's backpack. We are going to put those up on your screen here. Take a look. This is courtesy Collin County District Court, showing photos with evidence markers, the murder weapon, that blade. There is the scene of where the stabbing took place, and his backpack, Carmelo Anthony's backpack right there. Now, the district court also released surveillance video. You'll see on your screen here that lit up orb in the top left-hand side of your screen. That is Carmelo Anthony exiting the tent and walking along the sideline of that track field in Frisco, Texas. You can see that video here released just now by the Collin County District Court as he continues to walk along the perimeter of that track field. Again, you can see the graphic on your screen of the orb that is highlighted Carmelo Anthony on that day in 2025. Now, just to remind you here, Carmelo Anthony was found guilty of murder for fatally stabbing 17-year-old Austin Metcalf at this 2025 track meet. He received a 35-year prison sentence. And just a reminder here, he faced anywhere from 5 to 99 years. Now, prosecutors labeled the fatal stadium stabbing a provoked, unjustified sneak attack inside that team tent that you saw moments ago. Again, this video here released to the public today by the judge in the district court. Now, we do have full body camera video. We're going to play that out here for in full for you. Viewer discretion is advised.
If somebody is treating the victim, they need to be over there.
Under a memorial tent.
Don't reach for anything, all right, man? Stop right there for me. Dispatch 443, I got the suspects, and they're currently treating the victim. Again, he's on the north end of the stadium. All right, any weapons on you like that? Go ahead. I'll look here.
How long? He put his hands up. I know I'm not.
4-4, copy. I'll be in route.
Help me, y'all back up a little bit. Come over here for me. Come over here.
4-4-7,
I'm gonna put your handcuffs for now, okay, bud? Dispatch 443, everybody can slow down. I got the alleged suspect in handcuffs right now, detained.
Everyone else can slow down. Suspects detained in handcuffs.
Hold on. You can open up the channel, and medics are clear to come in. Have them come to the northeast entrance. That's gonna be a gate that's wide open there, and then you come to the victim from there.
Received.
Alright, this is the alleged suspect. All right, bye.
Dispatch is 432.
Okay. We'll figure that in a minute. So nothing on your person at all?
No, sir.
Nothing?
No, sir.
Mind if I reach in your pockets and stuff and all that? Nothing gonna stab me now?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm going to be out with this, okay? Racing.
All right, I'm gonna be a little personal there, okay? Just to make sure.
My car's right there.
Okay. Yeah.
You want me to get up now?
All right. The victim's going to be underneath that tent over there, so I'll get medics.
Thank you for analyzing.
Memorial tent over there, guys. All right.
He put his hands on me. I told him not to. He put his hands on me.
What's happening right now? Victim is over here on the north end. They got staff standing to him right now. This is the alleged suspect. Okay. Already? No. We searched them. You got nothing
I
on
don't
him.
know what happened.
423. Checkers everything is CPR progress for a little bit. Crazy. Yeah, that's the wrong thing. Crazy.
Oh, man, start over here for a side. It's up to you. It's up to you.
That's fine. This is closer.
Let me do one more little check of you, okay?
Yes, sir.
You don't mind for reaching your pockets, anything like that? You good?
You can.
We are just wearing this one pair of pants?
No, ma'am. I'm wearing some little underpants.
Oh, yeah. But
Yeah,
it's not
like,
pockets. These are
no, ma'am, I
pockets.
don't think so.
Okay.
What's your name, man?
Carmelo Anthony, Karmelo.
430, you show me out.
Okay.
Crazy.
Have a seat here real quick, man. Watch your head. Let me check your hood here, buddy, okay?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'll tell you what, lean this way so you're not resting on your hands, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, see a little bit of blood on your hands there, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right.
402, I'm on scene.
So your first name is Carmelo?
Yes, sir. Karmelo.
Let's see, hold on one second.
Is he gonna be okay?
I don't know yet, man. Carmelo, C-A-R-A.
K-A-R.
K-A-R-M-E-L-O.
M-E-L-O.
Carmelo. What's your last name?
Anthony.
A-N-T-H.
O-N-Y.
O-N-Y. Where are you in?
I'm in 12th grade.
10th grade? You go to Emerson?
No, sir.
Where do you go? Centennial. Okay.
I'm in 12th grade.
12th grade?
Yes, sir.
Okay. No, Centennial. All right, sit tight for me real quick, bud, all right? All right. Let me run this guy real quick.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to him at all.
Those moments there, Anthony being taken into custody. Brooke Taylor posting this on X. Judge John Roach tells me he released the evidence because, quote, I understand the public's desire to know what happened in the courtroom. The overwhelming focus on my ruling regarding the media in the courtroom was to protect the process, witnesses, and jury. Now that the trial is over, it is important to me to provide transparency. Again, no cameras in the courtroom for this trial. That was just about 1 week ago. Here on Live Now, we are going to take another commercial break this hour. My name's Alexandra Goldberg. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
For 4 days inside a Collin County courtroom, 12 people in Texas saw something the rest of the country wasn't allowed to. No cameras, no phones. The judge had ordered every electronic device out of the room. Whatever those 12 jurors watched, whatever they heard played back over those courtroom speakers, surveillance footage, frantic 911 calls, the words a teenager said out loud in the minutes after a boy his own age lay dying on a stadium floor, all of it stayed sealed behind that courtroom door. And then they came back in 3 hours. 3 hours to look at a 17-year-old with no criminal record, a kid who was captain of 2 varsity teams, worked 2 part-time jobs, and was weeks away from walking the stage at his own graduation, and decide he wasn't defending himself, that he was guilty of murder. Not manslaughter, murder. And they sent him to prison for 35 years. So here's the question that's been sitting underneath this entire case from the very beginning. The question that split a town, flooded the internet, and put 2 sets of supporters on opposite sidewalks outside that courthouse screaming at each other. What did those jurors see that we didn't? Because for more than a year, almost everyone outside that courtroom was arguing about this case without the evidence. They were arguing about race, about politics, about a GoFundMe and a defense fund and 100 competing rumors. They were arguing about a story. The jury wasn't arguing about a story. The jury was watching tape. And just days ago, a judge finally unsealed it. More than 6 gigabytes of it. The same surveillance footage those jurors watched. The same 911 audio. The photographs. The knife. The things that, behind closed doors, took 12 strangers only 3 hours to agree on. This is what they saw. But before we get to that, before the verdict, before the appeal that's already been filed, before any of it, you have to understand who was actually standing in that stadium on the morning of April 2nd, 2025. Because this story has been told 1,000 ways by people who needed it to mean something. It's been told by people who never met either of these boys. So let's start with the one who isn't here to tell it himself. His name was Austin Metcalf. He was 17 years old, a junior at Frisco Memorial High School. He was the MVP linebacker of his football team, the kind of kid teammates described as a leader, the one who lit up a room, the one who believed in the players around him. He had a twin brother named Hunter. And on a rainy Wednesday morning at a track and field championship, Austin Metcalf was stabbed once in the chest. The blade reached his heart. Despite a coach pressing down on the wound and an athletic trainer performing CPR until the paramedics arrived, Austin died that morning, by his father's account, in the arms of his twin. He was 17. The boy charged with killing him was also 17. His name is Carmelo Anthony. And by almost every account before that morning, his life looked nothing like the after. Captain of the track and football teams at a different Frisco high school. 2 jobs. No prior record. A kid on track to graduate the following month. The two of them did not know each other. They had never met. And by the time that track meet was over, one of them was dead, and the other was sitting in the back of a squad car, weeping, saying the same thing over and over. He put his hands on me. I told him not to put his hands on me. That sentence, that single, repeated sentence, became the entire war. Because Carmelo Anthony has said, from the very first day, that he acted in self-defense. That he was shoved. That he was afraid. That what happened under that tent was not murder. The state of Texas said it was. The state said it was unjustified. And a jury of 12 agreed. So both sides have a story. Both sides have always had a story. And for over a year, that's all the public had. Stories, pointed at each other from opposite sides of a courthouse. But the jury didn't convict Carmelo Anthony on a story. They convicted him on what they were shown. And what they were shown was sealed, until now. The footage is grainy. That's the first thing you notice. It's an overhead shot, taken from a camera mounted somewhere up near the stadium press box, looking down across the bleachers at David Kuykendall Stadium in Frisco, Texas. It's the morning of April 2nd, 2025, and it has been raining. You can see the tents, team tents, set up along the stands to keep athletes dry during the weather delay. Under one of them, the Memorial High School tent, a cluster of figures is gathered. From this distance, on this camera, you can't make out a single face. They're just shapes. Shapes waiting out a storm at a high school track meet. Then, at about 9:55 in the morning, something moves. It's quick. A sudden burst of motion under the tent. 2 figures, close together, a flurry of activity that lasts only seconds. People start to scatter. Some walk away fast. Some run. Others move toward the tent, toward whatever just happened inside that cluster of shapes. And then one figure in a gray hoodie breaks away from the group entirely, comes down the bleachers, stumbles hard over the bottom rows, catches himself, gets back up, and runs, more than 45 yards down the length of the grandstand and out toward the parking lot, with people trailing behind him, pointing. That's it. That is the surveillance video that 12 jurors in Collin County watched. And here is the thing you need to understand about it. The thing that sat at the dead center of this entire trial. The camera caught the before. The camera caught the after. The camera did not catch the 4 seconds in between. It was too far away, too grainy. At the exact moment that mattered most, the moment a 17-year-old named Austin Metcalf was stabbed once in the chest, the blade reaching his heart, there is no clear picture. Just a blur of motion under a tent. The single most consequential act of this entire case. The act that ended one boy's life and sent another to prison for 35 years, happened in the one spot the lens couldn't reach. So think about what that means. The jury was handed the most important question in the room. What actually happened in those 4 seconds? And they were handed a video that refuses to answer it. They could see Austin and his friends walking toward that tent. They could see Carmelo Anthony running away from it. But the moment itself? They had to build that moment out of everything around the gap. The shouting before, the scattering after, the 911 calls, the words Anthony himself said, minutes later, on a police officer's body camera. And those words, that's the part the public is only hearing now. Because for more than a year, this footage was locked away. Judge John Roach Jr. had banned all cameras and recording devices from his courtroom. The whole trial, 2 weeks of it, played out behind closed doors, as far as the public was concerned. Which meant that the entire national argument over this case, all the noise, all the protests on opposite sidewalks, was an argument conducted almost entirely without the evidence. People were fighting over a story they had never actually seen. And then, on the evening of Friday, June 19th, 10 days after the verdict, the judge released it. More than 6 gigabytes of it. The surveillance video, the 911 audio, the body camera footage, the photographs, the knife, The exact materials that 12 jurors had spent days staring at inside that sealed room, dropped, all at once, into public view. The judge said he understood why people wanted to see it. He said his courtroom restrictions had only ever been about protecting the process, the witnesses, the jury, the fairness of the trial itself. So now it's out. All of it. The footage that doesn't show the stabbing. The audio that does show something else entirely. And here's what we're going to do across the rest of this story. We are going to walk through that evidence the way the jury walked through it, piece by piece, in order, the same materials in the same sequence. The video, the calls, the words. We're going to look at exactly what those 12 people were looking at when they made the decision that split a community in half. Because the gap in that footage, those 4 missing seconds under the tent, that's the whole case. The prosecution had a name for what happened in that gap. The defense had a completely different one. One side called it murder. The other called it a frightened teenager protecting himself. The jury had to choose. In 3 hours, they did. The camera couldn't tell them what happened. So what did? To understand the 4 seconds the camera missed, you have to go back about 15 minutes, to the kind of ordinary morning that nobody films because nothing is supposed to happen. April 2nd, 2025. A district-wide track and field championship at David Kuykendall Stadium in Frisco, Texas, drawing athletes from high schools across the area. Austin Metcalf was one of them. He'd turned 17 the previous summer, a junior at Frisco Memorial High School, the MVP linebacker on his football team. People who knew him used the same words over and over. Leader, mentor, the kid who lit up a room. His mother would later call him a peacemaker and a protector. He had a twin brother, Hunter, who was there with him that morning. By every account, Austin was a young man with a future taking shape in front of him. College football on the horizon, the easy confidence of someone his teammates looked up to. That morning, the weather turned. A thunderstorm rolled in, heavy rain, and the meet went into a delay. All across the bleachers, teams did the obvious thing. They ducked under their tents to wait it out. Every school had set one up, every school except one. Centennial High School, where a 17-year-old named Carmelo Anthony was a student and a team captain, hadn't put up a tent. So when the rain came down, Anthony and some of his teammates had nowhere of their own to go. According to trial testimony, they first sheltered in a nearby baseball dugout until a baseball coach told them to leave. And here is where the accounts begin to split, where a rain delay at a high school track meet started becoming something else. By one account, a memorial student named Eddie Parra waved Anthony over to the memorial tent, and the two of them talked for about 5 minutes, friendly, no tension. Then Austin's twin brother, Hunter, approached and asked Anthony to leave. Then Austin himself came over and confronted him directly. What happened in the next 2 minutes is the most contested stretch of this entire case. The students who were under that tent, nearly all of them from Memorial, Austin School, told a consistent story on the stand. That Anthony was the one who didn't belong there, that he was asked to leave repeatedly, by some estimates as many as 15 times, and that he refused. Several of them described a chilling line. They said that as the confrontation escalated, Anthony kept his hand inside his backpack and warned the group, "Touch me and see what happens." One witness said Austin replied, "In effect, you don't have anything in that backpack," and then reached out to move him. The defense told a different story about those same 2 minutes. Anthony's attorney, Mike Howard, pointed out that every one of those student witnesses came from Memorial, that they were Austin's classmates, his teammates, and that a jury should be alert to the possibility of bias. Howard argued that Anthony was seated when the confrontation happened, that it was Austin and his brother who approached him, that Austin was the one who made physical contact first, and that Anthony, outnumbered and hemmed in, reacted in what the defense called a split second of fear and chaos. Howard would later put it bluntly to the jury. Austin Metcalf, he argued, had no legal right to put his hands on Anthony, no legal right to physically remove him from a tent in a public stadium. The prosecution rejected all of it. First Assistant District Attorney Bill Werski told jurors the killing had nothing to do with self-defense, that it was, in his words, unprovoked, unjustified, and senseless. His line to the jury was sharp and simple. You don't get to meet a shove with a stab, especially if you provoke the shove in the first place. And underneath that legal argument sat a physical fact that neither side disputed. These were not two evenly matched teenagers. Austin Metcalf stood around 6 feet tall and weighed roughly 200 pounds, a varsity linebacker. Carmelo Anthony was listed at 5'11" and about 162 pounds, 50 to 60 pounds lighter. The defense leaned on that gap as evidence of genuine fear. The prosecution argued it cut the other way, that a smaller, seated teenager had no business answering a shove with a blade. Because that's the detail that re-escalates everything. Strip away the competing narratives. Who waved who over, who spoke first, whose hand touched whom, and you are left with one fact that doesn't move. There was a knife. A folding knife, somewhere in that backpack, at a high school track meet, in the hands of a 17-year-old. The defense would note, accurately, that carrying a blade that size is not against the law in Texas, even if it violated school policy. But the prosecution's question hung over the entire trial, and it's the question that pulls this story into its next phase. Not did the rain force these boys under the same tent. Not who was rude to whom. Why was the knife already out of the backpack before anyone laid a hand on anyone? And what, exactly, did that grainy camera fail to capture in the 2 minutes those two boys stood face to face? For a stretch of this trial, the self-defense argument didn't just sound plausible. It sounded like it might actually win. Because once the prosecution rested, after 21 witnesses, fewer than the 35 they'd originally lined up, the defense stood up and started building a picture that was genuinely hard to dismiss. And the picture started with the body in the tent. Not Austin Metcalf's, Carmelo Anthony's. Picture it the way the defense asked the jury to. A 17-year-old sitting down, his bag on his lap, hemmed into a crowded tent with as many as 20 other kids around him, and not just around him. Over him, standing, looking down. By the defense's account, Anthony was the one seated and surrounded when Austin Metcalf and his twin brother approached, and Austin, the bigger of the two by 50 to 60 pounds, a varsity linebacker against a runner outweighed by the margin of a small adult, was the one who closed the distance. Then the defense brought witnesses who softened the edges of the prosecution's story. Anthony's own track coach testified that mingling under another school's tent wasn't some hostile invasion, that in the organized chaos of an all-day track meet, athletes from rival schools talk to each other, share space, drift between tents. It was, in his telling, normal. A Centennial student who knew Anthony said he'd seemed in a completely normal mood that morning, that nothing about the day felt like a prelude to anything. And then came the witness who mattered most. A teenager who told jurors he saw arms go out, saw someone make physical contact with Anthony, and who remembered Anthony afterward, crying, saying the same thing over and over. I told him not to touch me. If you were a juror, that's a real moment of doubt. A smaller kid, sitting, boxed in, a bigger athlete reaching for him first. The defense's attorney, Mike Howard, sharpened it into a legal point. Austin Metcalf, he argued, had no legal right to put his hands on Anthony, no legal right to physically remove another student from a tent in a public stadium. And from the very beginning, going back to a statement Howard gave right after the indictment, the defense had promised exactly this, that when the full story was finally heard, the prosecution would not be able to rule out the reasonable doubt that Carmelo Anthony may have acted in self-defense. For a few hours, it looked like they might be right. The judge let the defense's case proceed. When the defense had earlier asked for a directed verdict, a ruling that the state hadn't even proven enough to continue, the judge said no, the case goes on, but the request itself signaled a defense that believed it had room to fight. And then it came apart, not in a single dramatic blow, but in the quiet, methodical way that real trials usually turn. It started with the small concessions. Under cross-examination, the defense's own witnesses began agreeing with the prosecution. Yes, a student asked to leave a tent should leave. Yes, and this was the one that landed. There was no good reason to bring a knife to a track meet. The prosecutor pressed Anthony's coach with a question that needed no embellishment. Is there any reason an athlete should have a knife at a track meet? There wasn't. He drew the line even tighter, reminding the jury that when the Centennial coach told his team to clear the track in the rain, the kids did what they were told. Someone asks you to leave, you leave, right? Yes, sir. But the moment the self-defense theory truly deflated came when the prosecution turned the cameras back on the defense's own star witness. This was the teenager who'd told the world, and at first, the jury, that Anthony was surrounded before the stabbing. That detail had been circulating online for over a year as proof of self-defense. On cross-examination, the prosecutor walked him back through it, and the witness conceded. When he'd seen Anthony surrounded, it was after the stabbing, not before. He couldn't really tell. He thought maybe it happened as the stabbing was happening. The certainty dissolved in real time. And here is where the device comes back. The grainy overhead footage from Act 2, the camera that couldn't capture the 4 seconds under the tent. The defense had hoped that footage might rescue them, might show the world that Austin pushed first. But the camera was too far and too blurred at the one instant it mattered. What it could show clearly was something else. The prosecution played the surveillance video and used it to demonstrate that this key witness wasn't even looking at the memorial tent when the stabbing occurred. The gap in the footage didn't help the defense. The parts that weren't a gap quietly dismantled their witness's memory. So the great hope of the self-defense case, the eyewitness who'd say Anthony was surrounded and afraid, turned out to be a kid who, by his own admission, may not have seen the thing he thought he saw. Another student witness summed up the prosecution's framing in 5 words the jury would carry into deliberations: lethal force against non-lethal force. The summit had looked solid. A frightened, outsized teenager, boxed in, reaching for the only thing in his bag. Then the cross-examination ran its course, and the camera that was supposed to free him couldn't see the moment that would have, and could see everything that wouldn't. The defense rested. The knife was still in the story, and the question from the cold open was still sitting in that 4-second blur, unanswered. Before we go any further, a quick word, because the most important part of this story is still ahead. If you're following this case the way it deserves to be followed, by the evidence, not the noise, then do me a favor and hit subscribe and turn on the bell. We cover cases like this one the same way every time. Court records first, verified facts only, victims treated like the people they were. That's the whole channel. If that's what you're here for, you're in the right place, and there's a lot more where this came from. Now, we've watched the defense's self-defense theory rise and fall, but the prosecution hadn't been sitting still. Because while the defense was fighting over what the camera didn't show, the state was building its case on something the camera never needed to capture. Carmelo Anthony's own words. While the defense had been fighting over what the grainy camera couldn't show, the prosecution had quietly built its entire case on something that didn't need a camera at all. It built it on Carmelo Anthony's own words. Minutes after the stabbing, a school resource officer named Eduardo Cortez had Anthony in handcuffs, and the officer's body camera was running. When Cortez referred to him as the alleged suspect, Anthony's answer was caught on tape, plain and unprompted: "I'm not alleged. I did it." Elsewhere on that footage, he can be heard saying he was protecting himself and repeating the line that would echo through the whole trial. "He put his hands on me. I told him not to." A coach who spoke to him on the track that morning testified that Anthony told him something even more direct. "He put his hands on me. I stabbed him." For the prosecution, that was the foundation. No mystery about who held the knife. No dispute about who used it. Carmelo Anthony said so himself. Then they layered the rest on top, and for a stretch it looked airtight. The prosecution called 21 witnesses, students, coaches, first responders. Several of the teenagers who'd been under that tent told the same story, that Anthony was the outsider, asked to leave again and again, and that he was the one who escalated. One 16-year-old testified that Anthony taunted the group, daring them to do something. Another witness recalled Austin Metcalf saying, "Just before it happened, I'm not going to fight you." And when Prosecutor Bill Werski asked one student witness flatly whether this was self-defense, the teenager gave the answer the state would build its closing around: "No. That's lethal force against non-lethal force." Then came the testimony that emptied the room. Collin County's chief medical examiner, Dr. Elizabeth Ventura, took the stand to describe the single wound, one strike to the left side of the chest that reached Austin Metcalf's heart, an injury she told jurors was not survivable. When prosecutors prepared to show the autopsy photographs, the judge warned the courtroom about what was coming, and Austin's family stood up and walked out rather than see them. That, more than any argument, was the weight the prosecution wanted the jury to carry: a 17-year-old, dead from a single, deliberate strike. And in closing, Werski drove it toward what felt like an inevitable conclusion. He demonstrated for the jury how quickly that folding knife could be opened. He reminded them that Anthony was the only person at a school track meet carrying a blade, against a no-weapons policy, kept hidden until the moment it came out. He was always going to come out on top, Worski told them. He reframed the defense's own evidence. Do not let them turn a threat into a warning. And he reduced the whole case to a single sentence the jury would carry into the room, that you don't get to meet a shove with a stab, especially if you provoke the shove in the first place. It was murder, plain and simple. By the time the prosecution sat down, it looked finished. A confession in everything but name. A grieving family. A medical examiner's verdict that the wound was fatal by design. If you were watching, you'd have been forgiven for thinking the only thing left was to read it aloud. Except it wasn't finished. Because just before the jury was sent away, the judge introduced the complication that quietly reopened everything. He told the jurors they did not have to choose between guilty of murder and not guilty at all. They had a third door. They could convict Carmelo Anthony of the lesser charge of manslaughter. And that distinction is not a technicality. Under Texas law, it's the entire ballgame. Murder requires that a person intentionally or knowingly caused a death, a sentence ranging from 5 years to life. Manslaughter requires only that they recklessly caused it, a maximum of 20. Same act, same knife, same dead teenager. The only thing separating a possible life sentence from a possible 20 years was a single, invisible variable. What was in Carmelo Anthony's mind in the instant the blade went in? And here is where the parallel thread runs straight back into the planted device. Because intent is the one thing the grainy overhead camera could never show. It couldn't capture the 4 seconds under the tent, and even if it had, no lens can film what a person knows or means in the moment they act. The prosecution understood this perfectly, which is why their entire intent argument was built on everything around the gap. The hidden knife, how fast it opened, the taunts, the hand already in the backpack. Mindset, Worski told the jury, not motive mindset. He was asking them to reconstruct a state of mind from circumstance, because the moment itself was unseeable. So the jury was handed an impossible-sounding task and sent to a sequestered hotel to perform it. 12 people, cut off from their phones and the outside world, asked to look at a confession, a fatal wound, and a 4-second blank spot on a security tape, and from that, decide not just whether Carmelo Anthony killed Austin Metcalf, which he admitted, but whether he meant to. Murder or manslaughter, life or 20 years, riding entirely on a moment no camera ever caught. The clock started the instant the door closed behind them. Tuesday, June 9th. Closing arguments end before noon. The judge reads the jury their instructions, murder or manslaughter or not guilty, and 12 people file out to a sequestered room with no phones and no outside world. The question goes with them, not whether Carmelo Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf. He'd admitted that. The question is what was in his mind in the 4 seconds no camera ever saw. They are out for about 3 hours. Inside the courtroom, the wait is full. Austin Metcalf's mother is there. His father, his twin brother, Hunter, leaning forward in his seat. Anthony's parents, his grandmother. The judge has already warned everyone. Any outburst, and you're held in contempt. Before the jury comes back in, Anthony's attorney, Mike Howard, puts an arm around his client. Anthony looks tense. At 1:35 in the afternoon, the jury returns. Guilty of murder, not manslaughter, not the reckless act that would have capped the sentence at 20 years. Murder, the finding that Carmelo Anthony knowingly caused the death of Austin Metcalf. 12 people had looked at the confession, the fatal wound, and the blank spot on the security tape, and they had filled that 4-second gap themselves. They decided it held intent. Anthony breaks down. The sound of him crying carries across the room. His mother sobs in her seat. His parents stand and walk out. Everyone else stays seated, the courtroom silent, as the judge tells Anthony his bond is extinguished and he is remanded to the custody of the Collin County Sheriff's Office. Deputies move in. He is taken out a side door. A 17-year-old when this began, 19 now, gone from the room in under a minute. Outside, on the courthouse lawn where supporters of both sides had stood in the heat for days, the news moves faster than the phones. A man runs through the crowd shouting the only 2 words that matter, guilty of murder. People who'd been chanting "Free Karmelo" an hour earlier go quiet, or cry, or shove. A bystander, watching it all, says the thing nobody on either sidewalk could argue with. This is a no-win situation. There's a child who isn't here anymore. And then, within minutes, it isn't over. The same jury that just convicted him has to decide how long he serves. The punishment phase begins almost immediately. The defense calls one witness, Anthony's mother, Kayla Hayes. She asks the jury for mercy. She calls him her oldest, her firstborn, her baby. When the defense asks whether her son has any regrets, she answers that she knows her son, that he is very sorry for what he did. Anthony cries as she testifies. The prosecution's answer is colder and shorter. Mercy to the guilty, Prosecutor Dewey Mitchell tells the jury, is cruelty to the innocent. The jurors are sent out again, around 4:38 in the afternoon, to weigh one more question, whether Anthony had acted under sudden passion, a finding that would have pulled his maximum back down to 20 years. 2 hours and 20 minutes later, they have their answer. No sudden passion, 35 years. He'll be eligible for parole after serving half of it. And then the room is given to the people the trial had been about all along. Austin Metcalf's family stands to address the young man who killed him. His aunt speaks first. She says April 2nd, 2025 is a day she will never forget, that the phone call from her sister still haunts her. His mother, Megan, draws the line that cuts through everything the internet had made of this case. For journalists, for activists, this is a story, she says. For our family, this is our reality. His father, Jeff, doesn't reach for sadness. People think grief is sadness, he says. It is not. It is rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. And he brings his fist down on the table. Then Hunter, the twin, the boy who had been at the meet that morning, who shared a birthday and a childhood and a face with Austin, speaks directly to Anthony. Now I want everything taken from you, he says. You took everything from me. So here is the payoff of that grainy, first-second gap, the thing the camera could not show. It was never going to be answered by the footage. It couldn't be. The lens was too far, the moment too fast, and intent doesn't show up on tape anyway. The question of what truly happened under that tent, whether it was a frightened kid defending himself or a knowing, fatal choice, was always going to be answered by people, not by film. And on June 9th, 12 of them answered it. They watched everything that surrounded the blur, and they decided the blur was murder. But notice what didn't happen. The tape never filled in. The 4 seconds are still blank. The crowd outside didn't agree. Half of it groaned, half of it grieved, and some of it simply refused the verdict outright. And less than 24 hours after the word guilty was read aloud, Carmelo Anthony's lawyers filed a notice of appeal. The jury closed the case. It did not close the question. Because a verdict can tell you what 12 people, under oath, decided happened in those 4 seconds. It cannot make the rest of the country see the same thing. The verdict was supposed to be the ending. It wasn't even the end of the week. Less than 24 hours after the jury found him guilty, Carmelo Anthony filed a notice of appeal. And in the paperwork, the teenager whose defense had once been funded by a high-profile public campaign now described himself in stark legal language. A penniless, destitute, and indigent person, too poor to hire a lawyer for the fight ahead. He asked the court to appoint one. He was transferred out of the Collin County Jail to a state prison facility northwest of Houston, and the case that had consumed a year of national attention moved into a quieter, slower phase. But it did not get smaller. This week, a new legal team stepped forward, and it was not a modest one. 6 attorneys, working pro bono, announced they were taking over the appeal under the banner Stand with Karmelo. Among them, a former Dallas County prosecutor, the director of the Innocence Project of Texas, the president of the Texas NAACP, and an attorney from the firm of Ben Crump, the civil rights lawyer known for some of the most racially charged cases in recent American memory. Their stated mission was a fresh, independent review of the entire trial record, and their framing was careful, almost gentle, acknowledging, in their first statement, the profound loss suffered by one young man's family and the uncertainty facing another. So what, exactly, will they appeal? Because here is where the new emotional thread of this story comes fully into view, the thread that was always running underneath, and that the aftermath drags into the open. They will appeal the jury. From the very first days of jury selection, one fact had drawn national attention. Not a single black juror was seated to decide the fate of a black defendant accused of killing a white teenager. During selection, prosecutors used their strikes to remove the last remaining black prospective jurors. Anthony's attorneys raised what's called a Batson challenge, a formal objection that jurors were being struck because of their race, which the Constitution forbids. The prosecution offered a race-neutral explanation. Those jurors, they said, were struck because they were educators of school-aged children, not because they were black. The judge accepted it. The trial went forward with the jury that convicted him. That single ruling is now the center of gravity for the appeal. And appellate experts watching the case have been blunt about why it matters. As one Dallas appellate attorney explained, the problem on appeal isn't simply that the jury pool ended up all white. Both sides get to strike jurors. The question is why the strikes fell the way they did, and whether the prosecution used them to remove black jurors specifically. If an appeals court decides that's a clean question of law rather than a messy question of fact, he noted, the odds of the conviction being revisited go up considerably. In other words, the thing that made this case a national flashpoint from day one, race, may also be the thing that decides whether the verdict survives. Because that's what this case had quietly become long before the verdict. It stopped being, in the public imagination, a story about two 17-year-olds and a folding knife under a rain-soaked tent. It became a proxy. Anthony is black. Austin Metcalf was white. And from the moment the stabbing hit social media in April of 2025, strangers who had never met either boy began conscripting them into a much older American argument. Lawyers on both sides told the jury, repeatedly, that the case had nothing to do with race. The country outside the courtroom never accepted that for a second. And the people who paid for that the most were the two families, the ones who actually lost something. This is the part the comment sections rarely sit with. After the verdict, with the gag order finally lifted, both families spoke. And what's striking is how little they sound like the war being fought in their names. Austin's father, Jeff Metcalf, called the outcome bittersweet and said he had chosen to forgive Anthony, not for Anthony's sake, but so he wouldn't have to carry the rage. He said the thing that cuts past every argument, that Austin will never walk through his door again, never give him another hug. Austin's mother, Megan, drew a line that should be carved over the entire case. For journalists, for activists, this is a story, she'd said. For our family, this is our reality. And on the other side, Anthony's father, Andrew, summed up the verdict in two words that no one online seemed willing to accept. Nobody wins. Then he and Jeff Metcalf described the same thing, separately, from opposite sides of the case. Death threats, threatening emails, calls from strangers who wanted them dead, a grieving father who lost his son, and a father whose son is now in prison, both reporting that the public had turned even them into targets. People want us dead, Andrew Anthony said. After they still got what they wanted, they still want us dead. That's the reframe this story leaves you with. Two 17-year-old boys walked into a stadium on a rainy April morning. One of them never walked out. The other will spend the better part of his adult life in prison. His case now headed into an appeal that could take 18 months or longer. And the country that turned them into symbols is still arguing about race, about self-defense, about a jury, about a 4-second blur on a security tape. The only people who seem to agree on anything are the two families. And what they agree on is that there was never anything here to win. Today, Carmelo Anthony is inmate at a state prison called the Wallace Pack Unit, near Navasota, an hour or so northwest of Houston. He is 19. Under Texas law, a person convicted of murder cannot be released on bond while appealing, so that is where he will stay, through every motion, every brief, every ruling, for as long as the process takes. And the process is just beginning. The appeal now heads to the 5th District Court of Appeals in Dallas. Legal experts estimate it could take around 18 months before that court issues a ruling, longer if his attorneys file a motion for a new trial first. His new legal team, the civil rights and appellate lawyers who took the case pro bono this week, has said only that it will review the entire trial record and raise every issue the record supports. But everyone watching the case already knows where the fight is heading. It is heading back to 12 empty chairs. Because the central question of the appeal is not whether Carmelo Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf. That was never in dispute. He said so himself, on camera, within minutes. The question is whether the jury that decided he murdered him should ever have been seated the way it was. Whether prosecutors crossed a constitutional line when they struck the last remaining black jurors from a case the whole country was already reading through the lens of race. The defense calls it a Batson error, after the Supreme Court ruling that bars striking jurors because of their race. And the timing matters. Just weeks before this verdict, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned a Mississippi conviction on exactly those grounds. So this is not a settled thing. The word guilty was read aloud in that courtroom on June 9th, but it may not be the last word. Which brings us back to the evidence. The footage, the 911 calls, the knife, all of it released, finally, 10 days after the verdict, handed to the public so that anyone could see, with their own eyes, what those 12 jurors saw before they decided. And here is what actually happened when they did. Nothing changed. The people who believed Carmelo Anthony was a murderer watched the surveillance video and the bodycam footage and saw confirmation. A hidden knife, a fatal strike, a young man admitting "I'm not alleged, I did it." One prominent commentator posted an image of the evidence with 3 words: "Never forget what Carmelo Anthony did." And the people who believed Carmelo Anthony was a frightened kid who defended himself watched the very same footage and saw confirmation too. A teenager outnumbered and outsized. The camera too far away to show the moment that mattered. Advocates calling the whole thing a travesty of justice. Identical evidence. Opposite certainties. The release that was supposed to let the country finally see for itself mostly proved that everyone had already decided what they were looking at before they pressed play. That is the strange, unresolved thing this case leaves behind. We were told the truth was hidden, locked in a sealed courtroom, kept from us by a judge's ban on cameras. And then the seal broke, and the truth came out, and it turned out the footage couldn't do what we'd asked of it. It still can't show the 4 seconds under the tent. It never could. The most important moment in this entire story, the instant the blade went in, the instant that decides whether this was murder or fear or something the law doesn't have a clean word for, happened in the one place no lens could reach. 12 people filled that blank with a verdict. The rest of us are still standing in front of it, seeing whatever we brought with us. And underneath all of it, untouched by any of the arguing, is the one fact that doesn't move and never will. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old. He went to a track meet on a rainy Wednesday morning, and he did not come home, and he is not coming home. His mother put it more plainly than any verdict could, speaking to the boy who killed her son. "You're lucky you got 35 years, because I've been given a life sentence without mine." Whatever the appeals courts decide in the 18 months ahead, that sentence has already been handed down, and there is no record that overturns it. So this is where it rests, for now. A teenager in a prison cell near Navasota. A family in Frisco living in a house gone quiet. A 4-second gap in a security tape that no one will ever fill. And a country that finally saw the evidence and somehow came away further apart than before. The jurors saw it, and they were sure. We've all seen it now. So why can't we agree on what it shows?